Hit record. All right. So welcome to week 2. I'm sure right now you guys are starting to kind of get a rhythm of how this class works. I'm Emily Green, and we're going to be going over just the material of what's to come. I'm an adjunct professor here at Full Sail. I'm also a EMDR therapist in Orlando, and I have a private practice where I am a trauma-focused therapist. And one of the things that you'll probably hear from me in this session is just my excitement for this, because it's really a lot of what I call resourcing. And so that's what we're going to get into. Resourcing for, just to help kind of support and cope and expand someone's life and their enhancement. So this is some stuff I really can nerd out on. So if I go too far in the rabbit hole, you guys just pull me back. Sound good? Okay, so we're going to go over just due dates and then jump into the week's material. Just a little brief overview. We're going to take a look at some context that goes over the history of the field of psychology as a whole. So there's a greater understanding of the role of positive psychology, why it emerged, and I think more how we can use it in a deeper sense instead of the more kind of light and fluffy, just positive thinking. There's a heck of a lot more than that available. So I think that context is pretty important, and it can help us understand that more. We're going to look at kind of the big figures in the field, and then look at the theories, and more importantly, I think just the really helpful tools that you can use to apply to help add more resources to your life. And then all in all, I think what you'll find as we get into the discussion today is really looking at bringing light to the importance of talking about not just mental illness, but just some struggles that we might have, and being able to feel comfortable and maybe uncomfortable with, or comfortable with the discomfort of reaching out and getting support that we need. So before we kind of jump in, does anybody have any questions related to anything, or maybe some interest, and can kind of maybe spend more time on certain things? If so, just type it in the chat box. From time to time, I'll jump over here and check it out and see if anyone has a question. So you can use the chat box to type in a question. You can also use the little hand signal, and then I'll get a notice that someone has something to say. So please use that to get my attention too. Sound good? Okay, so we're going to get into the material. Oh, wait. Assignment due dates. Before I forget, today you have your call to play due. I'm sure Stephanie went over it last week, but I just want to remind everybody, it says a test, but as you know now, it is not really a test. That's just kind of the technical way we have to set it up on our end. It's just a series of questions. You don't have to do any of the reading yet. What it does is it really helps to kind of introduce you and get you reflecting on what's to come. So it's a good primer. So just make sure you do that by tonight. Thursday, you'll have your initial discussion post due, and then Sunday, you have your comments due. So just a reminder of when things, are due. Okay, so how many of y'all are familiar with psychology? Is it something that you've been introduced to before, or is it kind of, one of those rare topics? Let's see. I find Mahila, I wish I said your name better than I just did. Says, I find this week's material interesting since I have Asperger's. Eric, very lightly in philosophy. Mahila, I hope I'm not butchering your name, but I have a feeling I am. Thanks for letting me know. I think a lot of us will, think of how this material relates to us personally, and then also maybe to, some other people in our life. And Eric, I think philosophy has a really I think it just adds like another layer that you can take a lot of this information. So I think you'll probably enjoy nerding out on this with me too. And Mariah took a course in college previously. Okay. All right. Well, cool. That's just kind of good for me to know. So I'm just going to. Ooh, Nicholas says, I've watched lots of shows and movies that relate to psychology in one way or another. I know one of the really popular ones right now, and this is actually a good point to make, Nicholas, I'm glad you brought this up. And also actually it makes me think of Mahila's your experience and what, having Asperger's, we're seeing more in quote unquote pop culture of some presentation or representation of, differences in mental health. And we're seeing more diverse characters. However, also within that, usually when some new group is being included, it's very much almost like a caricature. So what I'm hoping that we'll be learning through today, and we can also just kind of bring into maybe some discussion or just awareness throughout the week, is really looking at, the differences in, that we have in within us all and within mental health. I know some of the popular, oh, everyone butchers your name. I really wish I wasn't one of them. So sorry about that. I appreciate you're just going with the flow with it though. But one of the shows that I'm thinking of is really popular, Mindhunter. Have you guys seen it on Netflix? There seems to be this obsession that a lot of us have with the really extreme, like degenerative. I think of that as a degenerative, the acting out. It's a history of. Oh, Eric, if you're into this, you might like that. It's a serial killer. It's looking at the history of how the FBI started, their behavioral science division, and looking at, well, what are themes in the presentation of serial killers. And it's a really interesting background. I will say watching it at nighttime might not be the best timing, but it's really interesting. Mariah, it is a show. I think there's some documentaries and some other aspects of this genre of kind of our cultural obsession with psychopaths on HBO, I think, but Netflix is the one there. Mindhunter is just a show. It's season 2, I think, is now on there. So just could be an interesting one. So in a nutshell, then what I'll just go over briefly is to put some bookends on the field in general. And it might kind of explain a little bit or shed some light on why it's hard for us to make space for needs when it comes to our mental health, and then also in how we view people who have certain struggles, if it's with a diagnosis of a mental illness, or even with less pathology, but still nevertheless, suffering with things like depression and anxiety and things like that. So traditionally, psychology had a really different field and a different feel actually than the information that we're going to be going over within positive psychology. So traditionally, psychology came from the medical model, which is really disease focused. So within this framework, you can see that it's really narrow. So it's only studying and looking at what's wrong. So it's looking at pathology. And within this model, it was really focused on more of the biological reasons for that, or, issues maybe from the brain and things like that. So the focus was on mental illness, how to treat it. So it did bring a lot of good in that context, but you can see how it made it only really relevant to a small portion of the population. And since it was on the focus on dysfunction and disease, it left a lot of other people out. So a lot of people might not have a dysfunction from disease, but we all can relate, even those with those that, life has some real struggles in it and it can be difficult. So it left a big portion out to others that came from a view of, well, how can we strengthen and how can we grow new behaviors that can help us adapt to whatever it is we're up against. The work that I do with clients, when I'm working with people, I work with mostly a lot of people usually come to see me and they're either in really anxious states and they're struggling with that and they're really kind of sick of it, or they're struggling with depression and they're noticing that, man, this really runs in my family. I don't want to be like this. And so what I find is really helpful is getting to resource people, because a lot of us within this same framework of psychology at the traditional way, we're so limited. We only have like a narrow repertoire of ways to cope and handle things, or we have just a little bit of wiggle room to be able to help us maybe learn a new way of coping with something. So the resourcing that positive psychology brings on is very I'd say it's like a pivot point, because it really recognizes that there are strengths and there's a growth opportunity that can come from really exploring more than just what's wrong. I think it's that two-sided coin, which is really helpful. We can make space for what's wrong and what's difficult, and then how can we bring in another set of resources that really helps to expand from that just really narrow lane that a lot of us are in. And I think it's safe to say that most of us would agree a lot of that has to do with, how we're raised and what's appropriate and what's okay and what's not okay. So what I really like about positive psychology in this week is it might be for some of us bringing in for the first time some concepts that can be very expansive. So it's not taking anything away, it's adding new resources in. And some of that might just be the permission of looking at, well, what is the state of my mental health? How do my relationships influence my mood, my sense of safety, and things like that. So the goal here is looking at expanding and finding more balance that will, again, apply to a greater portion of the population. So not just, those suffering with a diagnosis of something like more just more problematic. So in a nutshell, let me see. I want to check. Is that speed going okay with everybody? I want to check over here in the chat box. Okay. Looks like we're okay. All right. Just like to check sometimes. So here we go. So I'm sure you guys have all heard of Sigmund Freud. Freud's really well known. One of the things that he brought, I will say I'm not a big Freudian, but he did serve a really big, again, another big pivot point in the field, is because he started bringing in theories and ideas that really expanded more than just looking at things from a disease medical model. He started to bring in ideas about what's the role of the unconscious and how does this impact our behavior. His work sparked a major change in how we view even mental illness. It was suggesting that not all of the psychological problems have that physiological cause. So it's saying that it's not just maybe from something happening in the brain, but it could actually be more than that. It could be other factors. His belief was that mental problems could be resolved, actually, and he could do that by talking about them. And so this really spurred and started revolutionizing the way treatment started. So that's where kind of the first talk therapy started. Let's see. So some other real big important people in the field that started to expand the traditional views of psychology from that really narrow way of looking at it was Adler, Erickson, Jung, Maslow, and Rogers. So these are some other really important changes, or I'd say game changers, in helping us go from a really narrow view of psychology and how human beings function and connect and grow, to where we are now. So let's get into then more of what positive psychology is. in a nutshell, I find that positive psychology on the surface, it can either really connect with people right away, or it really turns people off. I'm kind of in the it turns people off category, because to me, when I hear positive psychology, it kind of makes me cringe a little bit because it sounds really superficial. And that's just the surface part. So no matter where you are in this, if you're like, oh goodness, this is going to be a Pollyanna version of happiness, I think you'll be surprised to learn, like I have been, that positive psychology is so much more. And I will say sometimes people do need to stay a little light. So if it needs to just be light, by all means, there's good there. However, you can gain a lot more from it. So digging into it, positive psychology, it's not just that like put on your happy face, which I'm sure a lot of us were, we've heard before. It's like, can't you just be happy? So positive psychology is actually looking at not just happy, but thriving. It's the study of human potential, of that potentiality, and how to apply certain principles to our life to go about growth, to add more meaning, and to bring an overall sense of well-being. So it's a lot more than just happy. This is something I hear a lot when people first start coming to work with me, when I've got my role of therapist, when I'm in that role and that teacher role, is I hear this a lot. I want to be happy. And I get it. I think we've probably all said that many times in our lives. Like, I want to be happy. However, what I always find is happy can be really narrow. So for this week, I really challenge you, like I challenge a lot of my clients, is, well, what if the goal wasn't just happy? Like, what if happiness could be there, but what if it's, I want to be more conscious. I want to be more confident. Um, I want to feel more comfortable in my own skin. I want to feel more connected. So usually what happens is when that little shift happens, people still will feel happy. However, they've just expanded their range. And the goal becomes higher. It's like that little saying, and I'll probably screw this up, but it's like, shoot for the moon and you might land on a star. It's kind of that idea. But I think for a lot of us, when the goal is just to be happy or quote unquote positive, it's really narrow. But when we can expand that, much like the field of positive psychology does, it allows us to look at other states, states that aren't just that blissful moment, but also moments that are more about that growth oriented. So that's really what the field is about. It's about the growth, the natural wiredness that we have for growth. And then it looks at, well, how in the heck can we actually do that? So we're going to get into that. Let's see. Kind of already got over this. So we're going to go into kind of the who's who of the field. I'm a really big fan of Dr. Seligman. And why that is because he was very much well versed in that medical model. He's been a part of APA, which is the American Psychological Association, for a long time, but he really brought in another view. And it's the view that there's just so much more going on in the psyche and in psychology of individuals and of groups, couples, and families that we miss a lot when we're focused solely on what's wrong. And so one of his big contributions that are one of the tools that you're going to get really practiced at this week is PERMA. Whenever I say PERMA, I can't help but laugh. So if you heard that, I was laughing because I just think perm at first. And I don't know if any of you ever in the early or late 80s got a perm. I know I did, and mine didn't work out like I thought it was going to. So that's just my little side note there. So PERMA we're going to get to in a little bit, and it's one of the tools that I find students really connect with because it is so practical. And I think that's the other side of positive psychology that I like, is that it has, it has feet to it. You know, a lot of times when we're talking about, I want to be happy, or let's feel better, it's almost like let's just kind of fake it till we make it. But this week, you're going to get the chance to actually learn some really useful tools that you can use in your daily life. And PERMA is one of them. And we're going to get into the details of this in just a little bit. So someone else you're going to get to know this week is Dr. C. I am not even going to try to say his name because it gets worse every time I say it. But Dr. C is someone who actually kind of gives me chills when I think about his life story, is because just it's such a beautiful story. So I think there's a couple of videos you're going to get to watch. So a little bit of spoiler alert here, but I really like highlighting this because sometimes I think it gets lost in the week, is what his history is. So he's a Hungarian American psychologist, and he was a survivor in Hungary during World War II. And as a child, he saw how people survived, and how some people, what happened to them after surviving, the atrocities of that time. And he noticed two big differences in people: that some people were just absolutely destroyed, lifeless and helpless after the war, which I'm sure we all can understand why that would be. His second observation was from a second group of people who went through the exact same thing, yet had and were able to keep a sense of personal integrity and a sense of purpose. And he noticed how those two different groups, it's as if one remained, yes, survived, but were deadened by the experience, and others were survived the same experience, but were be able to stay intact. We're able to stay in touch with a portion of what it was to me be human and alive. And so this was one of the big catalysts that led him into looking at, well, what's it about this second group of people? And this really inspired his work in the field of positive psychology, looking at those resources that people had, the strength and resiliency, and where does that come from? And then how might someone cultivate that in their life? And his main contribution is the theory of flow. And this is one you're going to get involved in throughout the week, especially if you pick, I forget which quest it is. I think it's quest 2 or 3. But it's one that I think our Full Sail students really connect to, because it you guys, you men and women have I don't know, you just have more creative juices in you. So the flow theory really seems to be something that just resonates. And we'll get into that a little bit more so you have a sense of what it actually is. So I want to go back first to PERMA. I think PERMA, and I'm laughing because I'm seeing myself when I was like 9 with this horrible perm. But I can look back and it gives me joy. I think PERMA is also one of just, if you take anything away from week 2, I really hope you take this away, because it really is such, what's the word? I just think it's so helpful. It's helpful in the sense of really helping us when we get into life, as I'm sure a lot of you are getting to right now, because you've just thrown yourself into a very high-paced academic learning experience. Most of you are all online students, so you have full-time other parts of your life in yourself, and you're doing this. We know how fast-paced it is, and that can be very dizzying, if that's a word. So what I love about PERMA and this application tool is it really helps all of us who apply this get a bird's eye view of what's going on in our life. And then it also allows us to get to dig into those areas, not only to assess and evaluate, but to influence those different areas of our life for the better. And I find it's a really good grounding exercise. It's a really good opportunity at looking at what your needs are, what your challenges are, and identifying certain areas that need some TLC. And then we can look at ways to actually go and meet those needs. So this is one of those that I find just to be so relevant, and students usually really connect with this one. So I want to say some time here. Let me see. What is this one about? So yeah, I mean, I've kind of said this before. So what you'll see here as we talk about a theory of wellness is that it's more than just putting on that happy face. We're talking about developing underdeveloped parts of ourselves, of our psyche, of our life, of all the areas that make up our life, those dimensions that are personal, interpersonal, relational, emotional, work life, family, all of these things all influence us. None of them exist statically, and it all impacts us. So this theory of overall wellness, it really allows us to take in all of those elements that make up our well-being rather than just focusing on a very narrow feeling of just happy. Again, happiness usually is a really good byproduct of wellness, but I find that it's when you shoot for something bigger, it just ends up to be like I don't know, a much more life-giving exercise instead of just, damn it, I'm going to be happy, if you get what I mean. So PERMA, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the field of psychology, everybody loves an acronym, regardless if they're good or bad. So PERMA is an acronym. The first one is P, is positive emotions. So this is the way to fight back against pessimism. So what we're doing in the P, positive emotion, is we're going to identify and cultivate positive emotions. So positive emotions can be anything from gratitude, joy, peacefulness, calm, safety, closeness, and appreciation. So in this part of PERMA, again, that silly acronym, you're identifying what it is that you want to cultivate. What are those emotions that you would like to experience more of? As you do this assessment, it gives you the chance of recognizing, man, it's been a long time since I felt really peaceful, or it's been a long time since I felt really close to someone, and that someone might be even the relationships in your life. I think this is a really cool time for you guys to be taking this class in this week, since it is November, and I know there's a lot of like gratitude challenges and everything in November. Sometimes I think they're kind of a little like cheesy. So I think PERMA is it's just a deeper way of getting at that. So I think this could, for some of you who are really wanting to cultivate more of that, since it is November, we're going to be celebrating Thanksgiving, I think this is a really cool way and a deeper way of getting to that. So in PERMA, P is positive emotion. You're identifying on those positive emotions that you would like to experience more of in your life. E is engagement. This is about being proactive about those emotional states that you're wanting to cultivate. And the focus is doing that through activity. So if you identified, whatever that positive emotion is in that first step, this is looking at, well, what are those activities that are going to help me cultivate that positive emotion? A lot of this is going to be, sometimes it's going to get us into a flow state, which we're going to get to a little bit later when we talk about flow theory. So this can be felt when you're fully engaged and absorbed on a task, situation, or a project, and that has more to do with flow. But the engagement piece is really important because I think it helps us recognize our internal power and our ability to be picky and select what we're doing to help shift our emotional states. When I'm working with clients who are coming in are highly distressed, a lot of the clients that I work with have very few moments of calm. So for them, the engagement piece, they can usually very resistant, because they're like, I just want to be happy, or I just want to feel good. It's like, all right, well, how much do you want that? because it requires you to do something different. So these can be activities that are maybe connected to what you did in week one and that are getting you more connected to the things that bring you joy and play. They might be more connected to the things that you identified that you did in your younger life, or they might be those activities that you still find joy in. The engagement piece can also be just really simple things that have to do. I do a lot of biofeedback with my clients in this resourcing phase because it helps them really appreciate their ability to control their nervous system. And the nervous system is really that the breeding ground for our mood and for our emotions. So an activity that could get you in touch with a greater sense of calm and of peace would be being able to feel comfortable in your body. And one of the best ways and the most simple ways to do that is to do breath work. So I use a really cool program called HeartMath with my clients that helps them recognize the power that they have when they can control their breath in a way that brings down their heart rate and creates a state of coherence. So it's really neat. So these can be activities. There's lots of apps, and some of you might already be using them that teach more meditation, or not just meditation, like just focusing on your breath. So one activity that you could do here, it's called the 5 breaths in and 5 breaths out. It's really simple. So you can see how easy this is, that you can throw a little activity in there. So on the 5 breaths, it's 5 breaths inhaling, and you're inhaling through your nose, and then you're blowing 5 breaths seconds out on your exhale, and just focusing in on your breath. And if your mind tends to wander, or if you cringed when I said meditation, you can just focus simply on the breath, feeling the air coming through your nostrils, noticing the temperature of it as it comes into your body, the temperature of it comes at how it comes out. You might start to then notice how your back is involved in your breathing as you're being able to get deeper and deeper into your lungs. I find that this is one of the best places to start, especially when people are wanting to get greater control over their emotions. So the next one is R, and it's relationships. So none of us exist in a vacuum. None of us were meant to be hermits, even if we really kind of think we were and want to be. We're relational beings. We need connections that are meaningful and loving and supportive. So when you're looking at this step in PERMA, R, you're going to be looking at your relational life, and you're going to be identifying, well, how am I doing in this area? Is it a strength area of mine, or is it one that needs some work? And for those of you who this is going really well, that's great. And anybody who's like, man, I'm no wonder I'm feeling pretty low or stressed because I feel really ostracized, or man, I feel really alone right now. And then this can be an area where you can look at, well, what would make an improvement? Maybe it is, getting involved in a student group. Maybe it's reaching out to an old friend. There's different ways that you can go about helping to strengthen that area if it's something that needs strengthening. So M is about meaning. It's about really getting into, the bigger picture of things. When someone has more meaning in their life, there's I think we can all understand that there is a spiritual element to that. It's one that is there in any religious tradition or outside that connects to something bigger. For some students, just being here at Full Sail, it brings out that more meaning. It adds more purpose. You're belonging to something greater than just yourself. And at the same time, you might be serving one of your big purposes, which is to grow yourself, to challenge yourself, to advance. And then also a lot of that usually for our students is tied to supporting families, wanting to have a career not only in something that's bigger for them, but will also elevate their family too. A, the last one, is about achievement. So I think sometimes we forget just how much we are wired to grow. So achievement here, it's kind of in a different vein though. It's not just achieving to win. It's achievement on this vein of bettering ourselves and mastering a skill, accomplishing something that you've set out to do. So overall, the purpose of PERMA, so if we go back through each of these, it's really to get that bird's eye view. You're looking at your life, you're identifying what positive emotion are you wanting more of, and these are the ways you can break them down. I find that this one is just such a powerful way. It's kind of like a map, if you would, of really assessing what is your emotional state right now, where is that coming from and why, and what would you like to add, and then how you can go about doing that. So these are those just different dimensions of your life, and when we go to strengthen those, it's going to, of course, impact us internally. So thinking about yourself, how are these areas in your life? Or how could you use this model to enhance, improve your ability to cope with the stress? So if you would, just type that in your chat box. Let's see. Personally, I'm struggling through a midlife crisis, so this class came at the most important time for me. Duran, I'm so glad to hear that. I would say this is a really good class that would come at that time. Let me see. So anybody want to share? Like, do you think you'll be using PERMA this week? Let's see. I think the breathing will help me. I'm battling with court with my ex. Oh, so I can imagine the stress that you experience. What I really find helpful about engaging under here when you're talking about breath work is it really does it does two things. It sets a boundary because you're recognizing I can't control what's outside me. I can't control the people and what they do and what they don't do. But what I can control is me. In the first place to enter that in a way that can kind of, I think of, what would it be? Just stay out of the mess of our heads sometimes, because I mean, I'm sure we all know when we're stressed, our head's not always the nicest place to be. So when you can skip the head and go straight to the breath work is so powerful because it activates the parasympathetic side of our nervous system, which is that relaxation, which is the opposite to the stress response. So when you are feeling agitated or anxiety or panic coming on, or even rage, going to the breath and simply focusing on the pace, noticing the temperature of it, noticing your body and your muscles start to go from tense to softening can be extremely helpful. Let's see. Jessie says, I'm in a state of anxiety. I have severe depression. I'm constantly having people say it's all in my head. Okay, so Jessie, here's one that I think you'll really connect with then, because I love saying this to the people I work with too. I say this to my students. I say this to myself. I say this all the time. I'm sure we've all probably said it to someone and heard it ourselves, like, oh, it's just in your head. That worry, it's just in your head. I like to remind people stress, and you can replace stress with anxiety or depression or anger. It's not just in your head, it's in your nervous system. So our nervous system is meant to balance us. And what we're talking about this week in the field of positive psychology is a way to help ourselves balance out. And I find that breath work is one of the most powerful ways to do that, because it's allowing us to get in states of calm by not going to our head, not going to our thoughts. Those aren't bad ways of going, but I think when we're in a very agitated or distressed place, that's usually not the best door to enter. Sometimes we need to go in a different door. And the breath work can be a great way because you're grounding yourself. It's not solving a problem. It's not engaging in like finding a good comeback to someone who just pissed us off or something, or trying to decipher why someone said what they said. It's really working just on soothing yourself. So that's what I find is really, really powerful about getting into a calmer state, is when you can kind of skip all the mental part of it and recognize that you have a whole system within you that can help calm yourself down. So we're going to go ahead and skip on to flow theory. I see some questions over here. Those would be more, maybe a little bit more personal. So if you want to shoot me an email, you can feel free to do that. So with flow theory is the concept that comes from Dr. C. And what he really found that was interesting was that, and I know we've all had it before, and we might not have just kind of identified it as, oh, this is a flow state. Flow states are really that moment when we're in the zone. It's a altered state of consciousness. A lot of times it happens when we're so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. We're so engrossed in the experience because we're focused and we're enjoying that, even if it comes with great effort. And what he found is that there's this sweet spot. So flow states, there must be a degree of challenge that requires effort. It can't just be, oh, this is really easy. So what I love about this is, and I think it speaks really, it connects with a lot of our Full Sail students, is what you're here to do. It's not easy. You know, you're learning skills, you're applying things. However, you're in that creative field, you're in your creative lane, and you're working on a project or whatever it is you're working on. And the effort that it takes oftentimes gets people in these states where they lose a sense of time, where they're so engrossed in something, it doesn't matter that it's hard, it actually brings more enjoyment. And so this is when that flow states happen. It can increase your productivity, it enhances performance, it can help overcome those creative blocks, and even really discharge some stress. So getting in a flow state, it's really when again, it's performing an activity. It's not going to happen when we're relaxing and maybe so I'm not going to get in flow when I'm swinging on the hammock. But I can get in flow when I'm performing and engaging in an activity. So for me, I love, I do Kung Fu and Tai Chi. So there are times when I'm working on a form and I'm so engrossed in it, I do get in this, it's a different state of consciousness. You know, I'm able to perform better or get into the groove in a way that I hadn't before. So you can experience these in many different things. You might experience them when you're working on a project in a class, or you know, when you're in the field, or if you're already in there. It might be hard, but you're able to work on it in a way because it's that, again, it's that sweet spot or that intersection of something you really like and love, and it requires effort because it's challenging. So let's see. Some ways that you can help get yourself into a state of flow. And I find that this can be really helpful, especially in the beginning part of your academic career here, is because you have so much going on. It's really setting goals and having a clear idea of what you want. And sometimes, again, I know like in this class, I always say when I teach week 1, play is the hallmark of play is it's something you want to do. You know, it's not forced on you. Yet this class obviously is part of, you know, you're here. So yeah, I call it the disciplined version of involuntary. So when you're working on activities in this class and your classes to come, when you can connect them to something bigger, it can really help you change the way you approach homework or classes that might feel like, oh, I wish I was ahead. You know, I really want to get to this class, or I really want to start learning this skill. It can help you kind of find some patience and maybe apply more of this, getting in that state of flow, to actually what you're doing now. It can help you pay attention to what's happening in the moment and getting immersed in the learning process of where you are now. And then it can help you increase those skills that will meet that activity, if it's assignment, if it's a creative project, or whatever else. These are kind of like, I think of them as the big takeaways of the field of positive psychology. Christopher Peterson has been another figure in the field. And he, I think within the last couple of years, recently passed away. And these are the 3 takeaways or maxims that he found. That what is good in life is as genuine as what is bad. And I think that this is a really important one to remember. Positive psychology does not ignore the bad. It makes room for it and leaves space and the effort that it requires to make that space to add more than just what's bad. So to add in pleasure, to add in gratitude, those positive emotions. The second one is what is good in life is not simply the absence of what is problematic. Again, it's kind of, another way of saying the same thing of a good life. Yeah, it makes sense we're not going to want problems, but the reality is it is going to be problematic, and it's not the absence of problems, it's our attitude, how we approach them, and also how we resource ourselves by getting support that we need, by, allowing ourselves to feel the way we feel and go and get help when we need to. That third one is the good life requires its own explanation. It's not simply a theory of disorder stood sideways or flip-flopped on its head. I just love that. That's just one that just makes me smile inside. So what I found for if you're like me, and when you first hear of anything positive, you cringe inside because you're like, don't you tell me to fake it. Like, don't you tell me to put on rose-colored glasses. The truth about positive psychology is it makes room for it all. And it's taking the bad and it's recognizing that. It's evaluating what else is needed to help assist in carrying with that, having that, making space for it, and then also cultivating the balance point of that. So if there is stress, where is the pleasure? If there is hardship, where is the joy? So it's not just defining everything or limiting something to the problem. It's also about resourcing. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways I hope you get from week 2 is learning how to resource yourself in times of stress, in times of hardship, because it's really important. I think the resourcing is something that a lot of us just weren't really taught how to do. And so when we can get that information, it can be a lifeline. It can be the thing that keeps us afloat instead of just feeling like we're barely keeping our heads above water. So this week, again, you're really going to be getting into, I think the 2 things students like the most is PERMA. I'm obviously a big fan of that one. And I just think it's because it's really practical. And it has perspective to it. And I think that's a good combo. And the second one is flow states. So flow states, again, they're really are I'm sure a lot of you, as you dig into the material, you'll connect with it even more. So I hope throughout this week, you're going to get to remember more that you are a whole person, meaning you've got a lot of things that make you you. You have a lot of things that contribute to your overall sense of wholeness, well-being, capability. And now you're getting to dig into those different areas, to assess them, to evaluate them, to identify what's working well, and to identify some needs. And then you are going to get to learn and actually apply some tools to help meet those needs, to help celebrate what needs celebrating, and help to bolster, what needs more support. So I really hope you'll dig into the information. The quests are really experiential, as you've already found during week 1. So today, don't forget you have your call to play. You'll get to kind of start thinking which ones might I want to do. Oh, and just to remember, let's say in your call to play, you pick, you're going to do quest 1 and quest 2, but then you decide, you know what, I want to change that. You can totally change that. So this is just, again, the activity that gets you start to thinking. It's a series of reflection questions that gets you introduced to the concepts that you're going to be digging into. So I think that's about it. Does anybody have any questions? If so, just type it in the chat box. I have questions about the quest for the week. Michael, is there a quiz? There's a quiz. Let me see. There's a call to play is the activity that's due today. And I'll go over all of the stuff in the quest and this. So let me go here. So that's all the material. If you guys don't need any of this, you can go ahead and check out. I'm just going to be going over Let me see. Going over the assignments for the week. So the quiz that you're talking about, Michael, it's the call to play right here. As you can see, it's not technically a quiz. It's not really a quiz. It's just a series of questions. So you don't have to have done any of the reading yet. It's just asking you questions that are getting you primed to take in the information. So this is due today. So this needs to be done today. Let's go to, where am I going? The quest. We're in week 2. Yes. Okay. I had to check a second. Okay. So in week 2, again, you're going to have 4 quests to pick from, and you need to pick 2 of them. Quest 1 is getting involved. So you're going to get involved in your local community, and you're going to be providing a creative deliverable that shows what that was, shows you connecting through that. You're going to be including a description of how you felt before, how you felt during, the involvement, and then after the event. So this is one of those quests that really can help if you're looking at PERMA, how to add more meaning and how to get more involved relationally into your life. So this is kind of that act of service and volunteering. A lot of students really like this one. And it might be something you're already involved in if you're involved in something, but it does need to be current to this week. So if you're already involved in at your church or synagogue or at a local boys or girls club or anything like that, and I'm sure there's a lot more going on since it is, November, and a lot of people are looking at serving, if it's the homeless or other populations in a community, you can get involved in one of those that are already ongoing. Quest number 2, this is the one that you can always choose every week, and I actually really recommend it to my students. I think the weekly plan, it's just really helpful. I have always hated schedules. They kind of stressed me out. So really getting to cultivate how a weekly plan can be helpful to me was a really good learning experience. So if you're doing Quest 2, the weekly plan, I highly recommend it. I just think it's a good one to get, because it takes a while to learn something new. Quest 3 is the brain teasers. You can find your own, but we do provide you over here with some other sources of them. So these would be, this is when we're getting into the states of neuroplasticity and looking at how engaging in the brain can help to build more connections, and I'm meaning connections with neurons and helping to retrain the brain. So for this one, this is a good site. Here, I'll show you. For brain teasers, you can pick from any of these. If you find your own, that's fine too. I used to subscribe to this really cool crossword puzzle that was that for me, but I didn't want to pay for it anymore. But there's also the free version of Scrabble on your phone, which I count as a brain teaser, so that could be another one for you. So in the brain teaser one, you're going to be selecting one of those to complete. And then you're going to be reflecting on your experience of that and the changes you might have noticed. Quest number 4, this is a popular one this month. It's the act of kindness. So you're performing 2 meaningful random acts of kindness, and then you're delivering the creative portion of that. In your initial discussions, I always recommend you stick to the numbered format. It helps make sure that you're covering all the questions. So obviously you don't need to do step 1 because you're completing your readings. But you say step 1, I'm doing quest 2 and 4. And then just here you state that again, describe your experience, and then you're answering these questions. Now remember, you're going to be connecting it back to the reading. So identifying the minimum is 2 concepts. So it might be PERMA this week, it might be the creative blocks, it might have to do with neuroplasticity, whichever ones that it relates to, you're connecting it back to that. You're supporting your work with material from the week. Number 4, don't forget about this one. So many students do. You're going to reflect back on explaining how all of this quest throughout the week impacted your well-being. So again, make sure that you're not forgetting any of these. This is like the whole chunk of it, right? And then you've got your creative deliverable that you'll be submitting alongside that. Any other questions? No, Duran, that doesn't count. So I work at a restaurant. I feed people every day. No, this is something different. You're, serving your community in a service-based position, not meaning like your work position. So it's a way of connecting to the community outside of that. Okay. I think it's more of feeding homeless. Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. That's exactly it. Okay. All right. But that could be a really cool way for you, Duran, to add more meaning to your job. You can recognize that, oh man, like I'm actually helping people, I'm feeding people. So that's one of the ways that you could bolster the way that you experience what you do. So if I do the brain teasers, I do an audio or video, I can take pictures. Yeah, totally. You can do that. All right, everybody. Well, I wish you well this week. I had a blast getting to present to you some of the information. As you can see, the PERMA is a big one that I spend time on. So there's some other cool information in the reading about neuroplasticity that's more connected to the brain teasers. So feel free to nerd out in that area a little bit more. Really enjoyed getting to share with you the information. Wish you well. If you have any questions, just make sure to reach out to your individual instructor. I think it's Stephanie, Michelle, and Marie. We do some team teaching throughout the weeks just so we get more student participation. So if you have any questions, just reach out to your individual instructor because they need to give you the answer that they want. Let me see, when will the video be posted? It will be posted by tomorrow. It just has to upload and things like that. So it'll be done by tomorrow by noon, if not earlier. Okay, thanks everybody for being here. And I wish you well. Don't forget to do your call to plays tonight. Bye.